again, I know you as a poet in general anyway, but also you have been one of the people that's led workshops for me and been teaching at the Roundhouse. So for you, what, it sounds like a dumb / simple question, but what is teaching and leading workshops for you? How would you describe that?
I think I can't really separate it from like the wider creative of like the process of me being writing, or the process of me just being a poet or in the poetry world. I really enjoy it. I find it really stressful because of the responsibility that comes with it. But I think it's like part of this because I know it's a cliche, but you kind of get as much as you give, and that scales. So the more you give, the more you get, and so trying to help people find their voice, trying to help people stretch themselves, trying to make their writing a series of choices rather than stuff they default to, is amazing, and like hopefully reflects similar things back onto me. So it's really very selfish, I think, is what I'm trying to say.
Like, it's interesting saying that teaching is very selfish, because obviously you're giving a lot to people in that sense.
Yeah, and I am being facetious with humorous intent. Yeah, it's just as creative and difficult and varied and rewarding as writing, and part of writing for me.
Well, then with that, then, like, so how have you kind of developed your teaching workshop style? Is it just generally the more you write, the better you are at teaching, or is it specifically studying how to lead a workshop, or is it somewhere in between?
I think it's definitely somewhere in between, but it is its own skill set that you can and probably should work on if you're going to be doing it. I kind of was lucky, I guess, in that I started teaching quite early on, not necessarily teaching workshops, but just generally teaching, because I've taught in a number of different contexts, and back when I was still living in Poland, I started teaching in academia, maybe younger than would be expected, not because like there was a private university that had a shortage of teachers and I was lucky that they hired me, but it's so it's that some of it experience and kind of learning by trial and error. Some of it is definitely going to other people's workshops and learning, by which I mean stealing. Yeah, some of it is kind of learning through writing and even more through reading, I think, and kind of trying to be critical with the reading and reading and learning and kind of writing widely. So not staying in one style, because I think one of the big dangers in teaching is trying to apply your aesthetic or your values or your formulating hard and fast rules, basically, and this is how it should be, this is what you always do in this case, and so on, and there's always exceptions to this. There are always exceptions to this, and yeah, so yeah, that's it. Sorry, that's a very long-winded answer.
Long-winded is fine. It's informational, I say. But like with that, and like you're talking about the different styles. Obviously, you've got different styles of workshops you're leading for different kinds of people. So this maybe a little bit on how you prep for that, because obviously you've got some workshops where it's arguably a spoken word workshop. You're doing it for people that are on the scene, whatever the hell you can call the scene. But some of it you'll have going into schools where people don't ever do poetry. So what are the differences between them, and how is it different for you prepping for them?
I mean, it's like every time it's different, and it's one of the first questions that you have to ask yourself, right? Who are the people who should be benefiting from this? What do they want out of this? If the workshop has been commissioned by a third party, it doesn't just come from that group, then like how do the commissioning body's goals and that group's likely goals and then my possible goals in that workshop, how do you triangulate between these and make sure everybody leaves not necessarily with what they expected, because that's not always a good thing, but with something that can be useful or good or otherwise, I don't know, usable down the line, and so there isn't a hard and fast rules, because a school group can mean lots of different things. I guess maybe one rule is that you absolutely have to prep and make a plan, and then you have to be ready to throw that out the window if your expectations were wrong, or if your plan is just not working, which happens, or if any of the factors that you kind of assumed turns out to be different. So that would be the one common factor, like prepare and then be ready for that, all that work to not be used, or for
I mean,
a
it's
fraction of
worrying
it to be used. Yeah.
like it's worrying how much of that sounds like me trying to prepare a D&D session and having to
Oh
throw all
yeah,
that out the window.
I mean that's essentially the same skill set. Just like
So
railroading is dangerous for a DM. Like you shouldn't railroad your workshops either.
that's good. And like they're like with that as well, like with writing and DMing, because I'm going to compare the two now. Like there are still, I've not styles, but things you not fall back to, but you gravitate towards things like, oh, I'm better at this, or I like teaching this. Like, what would you say are things that you tend to gravitate towards when it comes to doing the workshops?
Yeah, I've definitely got stuff that I feel more, areas in which I feel more comfortable. I like, okay, so I like introducing play in writing. I like kind of arbitrary limitations and writing with strange constraints that both kind of force you out of your normal writing style, and kind of remove some of the pressure because it's a game or because it's clearly preposterous, and everybody's making it under the same constraints. So you just kind of finishing it feels like a relief, and you can share. And then so that's one thing that I enjoy. I like working either with multiple languages or with something that challenges just the standard English, I guess, both because this is my second language, and because it's useful. So I've run translation workshops for monolingual groups before, which was fun, and stuff like that. Introducing the idea of editing as well, and how it can be part of the creative process rather than like a chore that you have to do once you've done the fun part.
I've definitely been into a couple of your editing workshops, because you've done a couple of those at Unislam and things like that, and like they're always like, I, as the photographer, so I would try and go into lots of things. Like, I'm just going to stay in here a bit because I like hearing about this, because I am notoriously bad at editing stuff. It's like, I'm just going to do 2 for 1 here.
And I get more great pictures, everybody wins.
Yeah, that's good. But like, I guess then sticking on my selfishness there and circling back to you talking about the selfishness of this to some degree. Yeah. I've talked to a lot of people just in general, just talking to people about poetry, and like even doing these series, I talked to Doug Deans yesterday who sang your praise, and there's lots of people that are singing your praises, A, just in general because you are a lovely human being, but B, you've been able to teach them at some point in their career, and they're very thankful for that. So from the selfish side of it, how does it feel knowing you've impacted that many poets and people?
I am blushing. It's not just like weird light balance in my webcam, but no, I mean it feels amazing. This is a genuine source of joy and pride. I was lucky enough to work with a lot of people, and then seeing them achieve all kinds of wonderful things in different ways and in different fields, and interpreting creativity differently is hugely rewarding. And even though the big secret is that what tends to happen is that I get to work often with people who are already amazing, and then I just don't ruin them, after which I can claim the credit for everything they achieve for the rest of their lives. No, it's wonderful, but I do I do feel like I follow people, and I want to see where they go after, like, if we've worked together for a while. But I do absolutely recognize that any impact I may have had is tiny, and it's really up to them, because I can only show people things, if that, and then what they do with them, and how there's so many different things that influence it, that it would be foolish to claim that I just have my poetry children and they owe everything to me.
Yeah, nice. And I guess now to almost wrap this up, I've got 2 more questions on this then. Firstly then, in terms of teaching, like, are there any things in the future you feel like, oh, I haven't taught that enough, I want to teach more of that? Like, are there any things you want to try and add to your repertoire teaching wise, essentially?
I've been so this is something that I have been doing, but I kind of maybe want to do more, and maybe this needs to be more of a collaborative thing than just me figuring this out. But I like using the process from another art form and trying to apply it to poetry. So I've looked at stuff that I know a little bit about because I'm interested in it or because I've dabbled in it. So I looked at like street photography, I looked at filmmaking techniques and so on, and how you can try to apply them to poetry and reflect them in how you write and so on. And that stemmed from me working with other artists and like in other art forms and seeing their processes and finding out how different they were, how different it is to, I don't know, make a dance piece than to write a poem, and how you find your way into it and then how you shape it and so on. And then if you try to mirror that, you kind of inevitably learn something about yourself and your assumptions and your crutches and so on. And that's my main thing is any learning should, like, the ultimate goal is to force you to make choices rather than to do things by default. And that in the perfect world, every single word, every single thing, and how they work together and so on would be considered, with alternatives considered, and then there in the poem, because you feel like it's the best. I rarely have that with my poems, but it's something to aim for.
That's nice. Kind of, because I feel like I remember there was one of the Roundhouse lessons we did at the Royal Festival Hall was on that kind of thing, where I was like looking around there, finding an image or something around there, and go from that. So I've definitely experienced the start of that. So I'd love to see where that's going.
Yeah.
I guess now, in terms of where things are going, then to end this up, kind of in a almost educational way, do you have any advice to give to anyone? I know we've talked a little bit about planning, etc., but just in general, any advice you just give to people who want to run their own workshops, or people that are running it that want to possibly do better at it?
On the advice on the like content of workshops or how to run them.
Pretty much, yeah. In general, and advice on if you're running a workshop, what advice would you give people?
I think listen. Don't get too involved in the fact that you're leading the workshop and that your voice is probably the most heard voice. Like if you don't listen, it's gonna be a bad workshop.
That's nice and simple. I like it.
For once, you know.